Good morning. My name is Nicole, and I'll be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the APM Global Community Webcast. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question-and-answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw the question, press the pound key. Thank you. Mr. Keith Palmer, you may begin your conference.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for dialing in to today's CA APM Global User Community Webcast. My name is Keith Palmer, Vice President of the APM Global User Community. I'm accompanied today by our APM President, GUC President, Manish Parikh, and our CA Community Manager, Melissa Poppin. First, before we get started, just a couple of quick announcements. Again, our community webcast raffle, one lucky randomly selected community member will be chosen to receive a $100 Amazon gift card. The winner will receive an email from caapmcommunity@gmail.com, so keep your eyes open for it and make sure that your spam folder, check your spam folder as well. Last month, our winner, Julian Myers, congratulations to him. He was the winner of the $100 Amazon gift card. Our next webcast will be December 11th. Topic will be the APM developer community. Chris Klein will be talking more in depth. Please feel free to check out the new community and join it as well. January 15th is the next webcast, and that will be speaking about mobile app demo with StrongLoop. If you haven't been to the new community site lately, go check it out. It's on a new platform. It's pretty cool. This webcast is being recorded and will be posted on the community archives. If you have any questions during the presentation, please ask in the QA panel in the WebEx, not in the chat window. The presentation will take about 45 minutes with Q&A at the end. We appreciate all the activity on the message boards. Thank you all for your participation. Today, our presenter is Jack Butler, a very active community member from Expeditors International, speaking on how Expeditors uses APM as both a technology and transformation initiative. Again, if you have any questions, ask in the QA panel on the WebEx. Jack will answer your questions at the end of the session. Thank you very much. Jack, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Keith. So hello and good morning. Appreciate everyone joining us today to listen to this speech. Bit of background, this speech is one that I gave at CA World this past week on, I think it was Tuesday the 11th. And so this is the second run through, and hopefully you'll benefit from my experience through that. And the talk is on how we, Expeditors International Washington, have used the CA APM solution as both a technology and process transformation initiative. And to give you a little bit of brief abstract of what that means is we're going to cover kind of the implementation, how we approached the APM solution and met the challenges that our unique architecture meet those challenges, and how we actually overcame what we saw early on as being some of the kind of generic APM challenges as well. So a little bit about me. I'm a senior developer here at Expeditors, and Expeditors as a company is a global logistics company headquartered out in Seattle, Washington. We were founded back in 1979, and we've grown organically throughout the years. And I mean that not just in the sense that we've popped up offices across the globe in an organic manner, but our IT systems as well have grown organically. And as is kind of reflected in our mission statement, we have a strong focus on customer service, and that focus has led us to develop customized solutions, and again, not just in terms of how we move freight for our customers, but the software solutions that we do to support that business. And those have been highly customized as well. And so that then in turn not only affects our IT infrastructure, but it ended up affecting our APM initiative as well. And we are truly global. We have 250 locations across 6 continents. It shouldn't come as much a surprise which continent we're not on. And this results in constant traffic. We never shut down. Our end users are also across the globe. And some of our key users in terms of a business sense aren't just our customers, but also our branch operations as well. So in looking at the sum total of how many users, say, will track with CEM, for instance, we have to factor in also our internal employees as well. So a little bit about what role within Expeditors we play. I'm part of the enterprise monitoring team, which is a subset of a department called IT Operations Management. And the objective of this department is to provide a stable and dependable production environment with as little unplanned downtime as possible, and yet still be flexible enough and agile enough to support the ever-changing needs of our business as we expand globally and continue to be organic in the way that we grow. And so the team itself is dedicated staff. And when we started the APM initiative, we started with 2 developers, 2 systems analysts, a business analyst, and a project manager. And this was actually a really good balance. And that's not to say you can't have enough work to have more people on the team, but this was certainly sufficient for our purposes. And then this team itself ended up being responsible for not only just assessing the needs and determining what coverage we have for monitoring. Is APM being implemented in a way to give us the maximum amount of visibility, but also to manage and improve these tools and maintain the data set within APM and the other tools that we integrate it with. And then, of course, and perhaps most importantly, to advocate the use of these tools, promote education within the company and within our end users of APM, and encourage the use of this in analysis, whether that be retroactively for triage or proactively to get preemptive. So having this central team, it was a key part of what allowed us to take an approach where we actually could identify some of the challenges up front and formulate a strategy in advance, as opposed to being reactionary ourselves as we tried to implement APM. So to this end, we saw that our challenges would be kind of a 3-part problem. The first of these was environment. And we had, because of our organic growth and because of our customized solutions, we've got over 200 unique data centers. And these are like remote franchises in a way that have their own servers, have their own network infrastructure, and really did need to be treated as individual data centers in addition to our one central one. We have over 250 unique homegrown code bases. These are separate applications entirely. And within those applications, there are numerous proprietary frameworks that frankly, CA APM and Interscope in particular didn't really support out of the box. Things like web services that we had developed on our own using some existing standard frameworks, but we had broken them apart and mixed them together to suit our own purposes. And so the end result was something that would not be enabled by default with a standard Interscope agent installation. And then, of course, there's the size of the environment with over 2,000 possible unique agents and agent configurations, which pose its own set of unique challenges. And then, of course, the second challenge of this is expertise. With no existing practice of APM or even business process management or service level management, we needed to address how to build that expertise, how to train up that central dedicated team, and also the end users as well. And then, of course, on the topic of end users is the question of adoption. And because this is a totally new technology to the environment, adoption is actually a key challenge. Because not only do you need to build trust in the data itself and build that understanding and get it out there and get it used, but you also have to build trust in the system that produces that data. Because as the new kid on the block, and the fact that it's using bytecode instrumentation, it's the new change in an environment that people, when the first problem happens, will want to yank out. And the moment a performance problem occurs, APM is often what the developers will say, that's what's new, let's remove that. When the reality is you need to build the trust so that they keep it in and maybe even dial it up in order to get the visibility they need to actually troubleshoot the problem that is occurring. So those were our 3 main challenges. And to go about kind of planning on how to address them, we started a book club. And this ended up being incredibly valuable, and it's a tradition that we've actually kept on since we started the implementation. And we started with the APM Best Practices book, which is from CA Press and was actually written by also a community contributor and a CA APM swap member, I believe, Michael Saito. And this was, even though a tool agnostic book, it wasn't specific to the CA APM tool set. It was very much geared towards how to go about implementing and making the most out of an APM software suite like CA's solution. And so we found that early on to be very helpful. And even though we didn't follow everything exactly the way he outlined it, it gave us a good framework and it gave us the vocabulary to discuss how to do an implementation. And then, of course, there are things like the Every Computer Performance book, which is a fairly simple book. It's small, it's easy to read, but it does have a very helpful approach for how to identify key performance indicators, how to use what metrics you have to actually evaluate performance, even if you don't have as rich of a data set as APM provides. And so that can be a good way to think about how your end users are going to be using this data set and start to plan towards that. And then finally, of course, was the training itself. And we pursued training with CA for that core dedicated team. We needed administrators of the solution who were very knowledgeable, not just in how to configure and administer the tool, but also how an end user would use it as well. So they went through the gamut of APM training available. And then once we had that, we were able to then realize that having that central APM team, that dedicated team, was a key part of having an effective strategy. And then the rest of focusing on transforming technology, people, and process fell easily into place. And so I'm going to focus now on each of those three areas that we had impact and strategy: technology first, people, and then process. So the first, technology, obviously involves the implementation, in this case particularly of Interscope across our pre-production environment, then across our production environment, and then finally towards the tail end of that, getting into the customer experience manager implementation. And then going back, we did kind of what we called a thin layer of peanut butter approach, where as we were implementing Interscope, we weren't going very deep. We were basically turning on our default agent builds with maybe a little bit of custom things turned on, but it wasn't really an app-by-app analysis. And that we did as a secondary run-through, where we then go back and do the custom instrumentation for each application that we were involved with. And then finally, we later added, as part of our implementation, an integration phase, where we would look at other diagnostic tools, other data sets, and try and bring APM data into relation with those. So in terms of implementing, we first had to build up an infrastructure that would support our environment. And we actually settled on a virtualized environment for our core APM infrastructure, because this allowed us a few advantages. Even though performance might be slightly degraded compared to a dedicated physical host for an enterprise manager, having it on a VM also provided us the ability to have better disaster recovery options, assured high availability of these servers and therefore the EMs running on them. And one that we've taken more advantage of is the scalability of this. And just recently, in fact, we spun up a new VM to act as an agent collector to handle the new metric loads that we were getting as we expanded our instrumentation. So this VM approach enabled us to be that rapid and say, oh, our collectors are starting to degrade, let's bring a new one up right now. And it was just a matter of minutes with no restarts required, and we were able to balance that load effectively. And so currently, this is a snapshot of our production APM environment. We have similar ones for our pre-production, which we separated into several sub-environments. But this one is representative of the overall trend, which is to have the manager of managers separately, a dedicated CEM collector for running the 3 CEM collection services. Those actually could be, if you had a very CEM-heavy infrastructure, split onto different EMs and therefore VMs as well. We have a dynamic number of agent collectors. Currently, we're at 5, but we can expand that at will. Our APM database, the CEMDB, is off on its own VM, and then obviously we have a redundant EEM layer for our authentication and authorization for APM. And what this is And so that allows us to use Active Directory for our authentication, but also to get very granular with how we secure the APM solution. And then, of course, we've got the 2,000 some odd agents deployed globally and the various TIM collectors, the software appliances for looking at the CEM data. And so what this environment currently supports is about 400 unique hosts representing nearly 2,000 agents at this point, and over 1 million metrics every 15 seconds being sent. And that's agent metrics being sent to this single environment. And on the CEM side, we have about 500 unique business transactions defined, with about 90,000 unique users being tracked globally in 117 different CEM groups, and groups that we've created based on the end user's geography. So there's quite a bit of data coming in here, and it's by no means the largest APM implementation you may come across, but the key part that we found is that it's been able to scale exactly to our needs. It was neither too much nor too little for the kind of load that we've been throwing at it. So to understand, though, the impact of this from a technology perspective, once we had it in place, you have to do kind of a maturity assessment of your monitoring. And I mean that more than just performance. So it really is kind of looking at what do you have visibility to in your infrastructure and in your enterprise. And before APM, this is kind of the maturity matrix that we had, where in terms of performance, we had very little to no visibility whatsoever. We at the operating system level could tell when a server was, under strain, but in terms of transactions or end user experience or anything like that, we had no context. In terms of faults, when errors happen or an end user gets an exception or anything like that, again, we had little to no visibility. At some layers, yes, we have very good reporting from the operating system when something goes wrong. But the rest would be kind of inferred by a user calling up and basically yelling down the phone at you. And, of course, then your prioritization is based on whoever is yelling first or whoever is yelling loudest. And that's not exactly ideal. So after implementing APM, the picture gets much better. APM alone is able to give a lot of visibility into the fault side of things. So when an exception in your application stack occurs, it actually can get surfaced to someone who can action it and understand it, as opposed to your end user. An HTTP 500 error means very little to someone, but it may mean a lot to your development staff. So now we've got greater visibility to that. And it's no longer about who's yelling first on the phone and who's yelling loudest. And even though, you see in performance, for instance, that it's not a perfect all green. APM obviously isn't a full-featured network monitoring suite, but it does give you greater context into those areas. It's still better visibility. And then add on top of that the fact that you can run both synthetic user transactions and track real user transactions through the APM solution. And suddenly those remaining gaps matter much less, because now you have the context to prioritize. When someone is having a performance problem, you don't have to say, oh, they called first or they're yelling the loudest. You can actually put it in the context of, oh, this is a very important customer based on the revenue we get from them, or this is an extremely important business transaction that is failing. We need to fix the services that support that. And so having that CEM or that APM Cloud Monitor solution added on top of that provides a great visibility necessary to plugging these maturity gaps in your monitoring. So the other part, as we did our implementation, I mentioned that we put in first the agents and deployed them across our various environments. We implemented CEM and did our business transaction definitions. And then we went back and we had to kind of address the challenge that we had where we'd done that thin layer peanut butter approach, just that bare minimum interscope agent deployment, and make it more meaningful. And this is where adding custom support came into play. And this can happen in a variety of ways. There is, of course, the common approach of doing a custom PBD that you write yourself. And hopefully in the APM 9.6 and 9.7 versions with the smart instrumentation, that is going to be less of a priority, less of a need for an APM practitioner. But of course, there's also great resources. The CA APM Community Library, and now the upcoming development community, is a wonderful resource for finding support for third-party frameworks that aren't supported out of the box, for getting advice on how to add something for a proprietary framework of yours. You also always have the option, and we took advantage of this once ourselves, to work with the pre-sales team to either acquire a field extension that isn't on the community site or to develop one. You can do a services engagement to get a hold of resources and get support for your custom frameworks. In our case, we kind of took a third road, and we started to create our own. So rather than doing purely service engagements throughout, we worked to create our own unique tracers, our own name formatters, polling services. In particular, we had to support our custom web service frameworks, where we were using a combination of Spring Data REST and Spring Web Services with some homegrown stuff of our own. And so none of those were supported out of the box. But by creating these custom tracers, we were then able to get visibility to that back-end tier that otherwise was a black box to us. We didn't even see the calls being made. Additionally, you can do the same approach for that what they call muck in the middle, where it's the business logic contained within your application that adds that extra context of what is this transaction? How business critical is it? How much of a workhorse transaction is it? Is it anticipated to be long running or not? And so with the onset of the developer community, this avenue should be more available to an increasing number of APM end users and should lead to some exciting things. We also didn't just focus on the Intrascope side. CEM is able to be customized as well. And so we did this by developing a plugin to do geo-IP resolution for our end users. And the reason for this was, by default, the only kind of real geography-based grouping we could do for our end users was by IP address subnet. And that wasn't too useful. And we actually ran out of user groups. We were unable to create any more because we hit the maximum number allowed by the software, which was kind of shocking. And so we then had to kind of redefine, all right, how do we want to group our users? And ultimately, what our end users, the stakeholders for APM were requesting was see them by geography, because we are global, and therefore our end users are global. And more importantly, we'd have users in China who you would have a totally different SLA expectation, different response time expectation for someone in China than you would someone in Florida when you're a Seattle-based company. So we really wanted to put it in that context. So by using the CEM SDK, we were able to do something that used a freely available geo-IP database from MaxMind and could then control how we grouped these users. And we did it by geographical region, so like Brazil, Argentina, et cetera, and then time zone. So you could get a little bit more of, oh, this is West Coast United States, but not so specific that it became individual cities or individual states. So that gave us about 120 CEM user groups, which were very meaningful to the APM end users. And this extension, by the way, is available on the APM community currently. We also did an enhancement of an existing extension from the community, one that's known as the EasyIntegration Kit. And this kind of late in our implementation became one of the most important enhancements we made to APM. Because of this, the original extension, it allows you to bring Intrascope metrics into a tool like Excel using kind of a RESTful API where you're just building a URL with the same regular expressions for selecting your agent, your metric list, and putting them into a spreadsheet. We wanted to do a little bit more with it, so we enhanced it so that it would also include the CEM statistic data, defect data, incident data, and so forth. We wanted to also be able to extract string values, because previously it had just supported the numeric metrics. And we expanded the number of formats that it could export in, some of which were unique to other tool sets that we had internally. And in some cases, we just enhanced the way it did a CSV file for better UTF-8 support, so that a tool like SAS, Enterprise Guide, for instance, could better consume this data and do some really heavy-duty analysis on the raw Intrascope metrics. And so this enhanced version is not yet available on the community site, but will be. So my goal is, with the new GitHub repository for the APM dev community, I will be putting this in there, since this actually has an original developer and I just enhanced it. So this will be hopefully something that everyone can contribute to and expand those export formats. So in addition to getting data out of Interscope, it's actually sometimes very important to get data in. And in many cases, this is as simple as the EP agent, which now also has a, I believe, RESTful API where you can basically send JSON data to it, which is very cool. So the EP agent is getting easier and easier to use to send metrics. But in our case, we also wanted to do something that was very much like what is now called the CA App Synthetic Monitor, formerly Cloud Monitor, formerly WatchMouse, which is a third-party service testing your applications external from your network from various remote geographies and doing synthetic transaction testing. And so we had a pre-existing service that we were using to do this, and we didn't quite want to switch during our implementation. So we developed something much like the kind of EP agent for Cloud Monitor to get that data from that third-party service and bring it into Interscope, granting us the ability to do better historical analysis, better comparison between geographies and between applications, and also to bring that data set in with the CEM data and the bytecode instrumentation data, which is really useful to have all in one place. And so once we'd created both this way of getting data out of Interscope using that enhanced integration kit and data into Interscope with the EP agent and with our synthetic transaction agent, we were able to do things to expand our user base. So we have a separate dashboarding utility that predates our APM initiative, and it's one that has a wide variety of users currently. So we didn't want to just get rid of that. But what this ability to get data out allowed us to do was to swap the back end for this dashboarding solution and make it Interscope instead of whatever it was before. And then to provide links, whether to the APM web view or even directly into the APM workstation, into these dashboarding solutions. So in this case, what you're seeing here is where we were using that synthetic transaction data. We used the EasyIntegration Kit to get the data for those synthetic transactions out, and we just swapped that back end. So the end users were already familiar with this interface. But now, Interscope was what they would link to get more detail and to do more investigation about an incident that would occur for one of their individual tests. And so it allowed us to get more users into Interscope and build that adoption greatly. So not only was this a technology transformation, but this led a little bit into both the people and the process change. So on to the people, and particularly that building adoption. The first thing we had to do was kind of define who was going to use APM and how, and then build that knowledge, is support them in the use of that, and then finally to partner with teams both to ensure that it gets used, but also to make sure that what they're using stays relevant and stays meaningful. So to this end, we started with defining the roles within APM. And so some of these may look familiar to those of you who are already using APM, particularly on the CEM side. By default, it comes with this idea of analyst, incident analyst, configuration administrator, and system administrator. And so we kept that breakdown, but we wanted to also translate that to Interscope as well and the workstation. So what could an analyst do within the software? What could an incident analyst do? What could a configuration administrator and what could a system administrator do? And so we broke apart, and this is where EEM really allowed us to get granular and to separate it by the domains for a business application and to tie those also to the same CEM business groups that we've created. And so we had kind of that one-to-one relationship. Once we defined what roles and what privileges those roles would have, then we could map those to job function. And so we went, and this, by the way, is where having in that dedicated team a business analyst or and a project manager really becomes helpful, because they're the ones who can conduct the interviews and say, all right, let me go talk to a QA specialist and understand how it is that they will be able to take advantage of APM within my organization. Let me talk to developers and see, is this something that they're going to want to do day to day, or is this going to be part of a monthly review? How will they be using the software? And so we took advantage of having that expertise on our team to kind of build out this matrix of what someone's function will be, what their interest is in APM, what basic user privilege would they be granted with to start with, and then what would we build them up to as the next step to become a power user. And so in some cases, the power user didn't go very far, but in other cases, we would actually envision people taking ownership of business transaction definitions in CEM, of the management modules and dashboards for their domain in Interscope. And so once we figure out how we envisioned these people using the software, we could start to figure out how to build that knowledge in them. Because we weren't going to be able to send all of our end users to a week-long training led by CA. So instead, we had our core team take that week-long training led by CA. We took lots of notes, lots of screen captures, and we produced our own internal training, and one that we contextualized for our applications and for our end users. And so we were able to break it into, okay, this person is going to be a CEM analyst. They're going to take the basic APM-CEM training. This person is going to be an Interscope incident analyst, where they're going to do transaction trace sessions and so forth. Well, they need 2 classes. They're going to go through the basic APM training and the incident analysis class, where they learn how to, not bring a JVM down by doing a bad transaction trace, and things like that. So we were ensuring best practices. We were ensuring comfort with the tool and familiarity with the interface, and helping build that trust in the data as well by empowering them to learn how to analyze it. So we'd have things on the side where here's how to do a triage. If you're in a firefight situation, what's just kind of the best approach for searching for that metric that'll be helpful to you? How do you baseline an application to compare release to release to see if performance is degrading? And so we tried to formalize those different processes and provide a repeatable training. And this has been one of the biggest keys to our success with APM. Then also with your end users, you need to partner with them. You need to make the data matter to the people who care about it. And so an approach to this is just simply to ask your end users, what questions can we help you answer that you don't know the answer to now? What can APM potentially do? And let it be the sky's the limit. Even if the software currently can't do that, just the act of asking those questions can get you a step closer, where you can actually come back and say, well, we can't give you that exactly, but here's something where you can make a very strong inference at least. Or with the APM developer community or with developing it yourself, you might be able to extend the agent to actually get and answer those individual questions. And so an example of this that we did recently is we had a particular business transaction type that was known to be occasionally performing poorly, but it could also be sometimes a very complex transaction. So by default, we were just getting end-user response times for this, let's call it order as the transaction. And sometimes it was very long-running. But an order could have 50 work order line items, or it could have 1. And based on the number of those work order line items, which is the kind of a part of the request, would indicate what is kind of an acceptable time box it should be in. And so we had to analyze these transactions in the bytecode to say, this is a 1 to 2 work order line item request. This is a 25 work order line item request, and contextualize the response times in terms of the complexity of the transaction. And that became wildly successful. And ever since we took this kind of approach, the demand for APM among our developers and our support staff has skyrocketed. So once you kind of build up that demand for the data and that trust in the data, that's when you can really start to take advantage of process transformations. And this will range everywhere from maintaining your APM initiative and your data set to getting the use of APM and the implementation of, or the instrumentation of an agent earlier in the life cycle of an application, to how to use it in a war room situation or to actually use it proactively. So to start with, you have to have kind of a maintenance discipline, and we have the advantage of having that core team to take on many of these responsibilities. But again, by having that breakdown of role, we actually had some roles who would have a maintenance function, such as maintaining the incidents in CEM, because the longer those remain open, the more muddied that water gets. They can become less relevant and less helpful. So they have to be maintained and closed out and managed and watched. So we could then say, all right, this maintenance function of making sure everything's backed up for configuration files, making sure the collectors are healthy, making sure CEM incidents are closed out. We could then start to break out those work units into their respective role. Part of that maintenance also included deployment. And luckily with APM 9.7, with the agent command center, this is going to be much easier. But we had to do our installations and our upgrades, particularly configuration upgrades and pushes, push a new agent configuration elsewhere via the suite of scripts that we wrote. And that's not an ideal solution, but it worked very well for us at the time. And this is something where the product roadmap is getting better and better, luckily. But one of the most important ways in which we leveraged process to get better APM coverage was with the system development lifecycle. And so in both the early stages of planning and design, as well as the pre-production stages, we ensured that monitoring, particularly from an APM context, was inserted into this process, where those conversations were started, so that we could start to do targeting, custom functionality much earlier on, where we could also ensure that we weren't taken by surprise, where it's no longer a push model where our central monitoring team is pushing APM out onto the applications, but the application teams instead were pulling that from us. They knew to come to us as well, and that just ensured that we had better coverage of our applications across our environment, and there were no surprises. And also that it was done uniformly. One challenge that we've seen with other customers of APM is that sometimes they'll have multiple groups attempting to implement APM individually, and that those approaches can sometimes conflict or be at odds with one another. Having something like with a centralized team especially, and then having it baked into your system development lifecycle ensures that consistent approach throughout the initiative. So the result of this process transformation is what a coworker of mine once called sweet, sweet data. And the ways in which that can be used are increasingly awesome. At first, it started out with development teams using APM in their daily scrums and their weekly and monthly reviews. And this included not only that bytecode instrumentation that you would expect a developer to be interested in, but also the CEM real user transaction data and the synthetic transaction data, which is awesome to see. They're actually contextualizing their own code in terms of the business operations when they do these daily or weekly scrums. And then we also started to see that we're now making performance enhancements based on the APM metrics from production. So it isn't just about triaging and fixing something as it stands in a production environment, but then taking those lessons and applying it to the next development cycle. And we're targeting those bottlenecks as we never did before. And quality assurance teams now are similarly comparing performance baselines of new releases to old. There are teams now who are actually using, as part of their go, no-go decision, APM data to say, no, this release is not sufficiently performant to qualify. You have to go back and make this faster. And that is an amazing thing to see, and definitely a cultural transformation in our enterprise to have that occurring. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly of all, we've now started to see that APM data is being used to answer the question, can our systems support this new line of business? And the follow-up to that, what would be necessary in order to do so if it cannot? And this is an amazing thing to be able to get out of the APM data. We are actually able to support your business directly using the performance data that you gather from this tool. So the final bit, though, is how to get proactive and not be just purely reactive about the things that you're seeing in production or even that you're seeing as they occur in pre-production, but to get a little bit better about, nipping it in the bud before it comes to bite you. So we did a pilot, and this is still very much a work in progress on our end, and one that I hope everyone out there is able to also advocate, but to see if we could dedicate staff and get value out of proactively analyzing this data and taking action. And of course, the answer was a resounding yes. We definitely are able to get value out of this approach. And in particular, we proved that a performance analyst can get to the data, whether directly through the workstation or web view, or as we found, especially with those integration points like the EasyIntegration Kit, so that they can come into additional analysis tools and really start to do a lot of fun stuff with the data. And then therefore get meaning out of the data. And yes, we determined that a performance analyst, when dedicated, can analyze APM data and can make sense of it. It's not overwhelmingly difficult to someone with just a little bit of training. And that these people not having app-specific expertise, they're not a developer who knows the code base intimately, they still can partner with those teams who do have the expertise to make this more meaningful. And then finally, these recommendations can have a demonstrable impact and one that you can measure and actually say, this recommendation, once implemented, had this impact resulting in this net gain. And that is an amazing thing to be able to do. There is, however, a caveat, and one that I'll touch in just a moment. Our key lessons, just to kind of recap, the first was plan ahead. Read everything you can get your hands on, whether it's the product roadmap and the administration guide, to the user community itself, to a book published on, if not the exact software, the discipline, much like the APM Best Practices book. And then create that roadmap and understand the needs of your end users. Because if you don't plan for how it's going to be used, you may get surprised partway through in your implementation when it doesn't meet with someone's expectations, and you then set your adoption rate back in order to try and scramble to get there. Dedicate ownership. Ensure that the APM environment can be appropriately managed by dedicated resources. Having that central team was incredibly important to the success of our implementation. Train. Don't just train that dedicated team, but train your end users as well. You want as many people as possible to understand and trust the data, and eventually to own the data, to have such sufficient comfort level with it that they can direct how it gets used or what changes you make in order to support them, how to get more visibility into the app, how to transform your business transaction definitions. And then integrate is another big one, and this is one that we didn't initially realize would be so important. But bring that APM data into existing tools and processes by any means that you can. The more places where APM data gets used, the more demand you're going to have for APM data, the more it's going to be successful. Don't just limit yourself to what comes out of the box with the web view and the workstation. Get it out there. Even if it's just getting reports out of the tool and sending them into a summary that you do every week with your manager or something to that effect, just get it out there. Send that data to everyone you can. And then, of course, contextualize that data. You want that data to be meaningful to the people who use it. And so by partnering with teams that have application-specific knowledge, you can help do that more effectively. But don't be shy of getting custom PBDs in place, or even developing your own tracers when possible, or even just trying to phrase it quite simply and reducing the complexity of the metrics to make it easier for people. And then finally, and this is the caveat to dedicating performance analysis staff, you have to budget. So if you want to be proactive and actually use performance analysis recommendations to shape your applications, you need to be willing to devote resources not only to the analysis of that data, but to actioning the recommendation. Because it's one thing to say, hey, we'll save several seconds off of this critical business transaction response time. But if your development team isn't able to prioritize that work at least equally with new business functionality, it's not even worth pursuing a proactive approach. It'll just be an exercise in frustration. So try and have that conversation for doing this budgeting as early on in your implementation as possible, so that by the time you're ready to do it, you've built the infrastructure to support being proactive like this, your management chain and the people responsible for it are going to be willing and already convinced of the need and the utility. And believe me, there is utility. And so for that, I'd like to open it up for Q&A.
Thank you, Jack. Nicole, can you please open the line for questions?
At this time, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1 on your telephone keypad. Again, that's *1 to ask a question. We'll pause for just a moment to compile a Q&A roster. There are no audio questions.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Okay, Keith, I will pass to you then.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of the community board members and community members, Jack, I just want to say thanks for presenting today. It was great information. Excellent job.
Thank you. I was happy to do it and had a good time.
We look forward to having you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack.
Bye-bye. And that'll conclude the session for today.
This concludes today's conference. You may now disconnect.